The notebook fell open before she could stop it. A soft thud echoed through the quiet room as Tử Tiên stood frozen beside the old wooden cabinet, her fingers still hovering in the air, her breath caught halfway in her chest, because she hadn't meant to open it, she hadn't even meant to touch it, but something about the worn leather cover, the way it was hidden beneath a stack of forgotten documents, the way it felt personal had pulled her in. And now she couldn't look away. The pages were filled with handwriting she recognized instantly. Jack's. Messy. Raw. Nothing like the composed man he had become. Her eyes scanned the first lines, then the next, and suddenly her heart dropped. I still remember the way she smiled that day. Tử Tien's fingers trembled. She turned the page. Even if I lose everything, I don't think I can ever stop loving her. The words blurred. Not because she couldn't read them, but because she didn't want to understand them. A cold feeling crept slowly into her chest. Because this wasn't just a memory. This wasn't just a phase. This was love. Deep. Unfinished. Alive. Outside, the wind brushed softly against the windows, carrying the faint sounds of the village, but inside the room, everything felt suffocating, as if the air itself had thickened, pressing down on her lungs, refusing to let her breathe. She flipped another page. I wish she would choose me just once. Her lips parted slightly. A quiet whisper escaped. Who is she? The question hung in the air. Unanswered, but already dangerous. Hours earlier, everything had been normal. Too normal. Jack had left early that morning to handle work through his phone as usual, stepping outside to find signal near the hill, while Tử Tiên stayed behind, cleaning the house, their son playing nearby, his small laughter echoing through the wooden walls like a reminder of the life they had rebuilt together. Peaceful. Simple. Safe. Until now. The notebook felt heavier with every page. Every word pulling her deeper into something she wasn't prepared to face. I can't tell anyone about us, her chest tightened. Because if they find out, everything will fall apart. Her breathing became uneven. Because whoever this girl was, she wasn't just someone Jack loved. She was someone he had to hide. Someone forbidden. Tử Tien's mind began racing. Was this before her? After? During? The questions came too fast. Too sharp. And none of them had answers. Her grip tightened on the notebook. Her heart began to pound louder. Because suddenly, everything she thought she knew about Jack felt uncertain. A sound behind her. Soft. Familiar. The door creaked open. Jack. He stopped the moment he saw her. Standing there. Holding it. The notebook. For a second, neither of them spoke. But something shifted. Something heavy. Something inevitable. Tien, his voice was low. Not angry. Not calm. But alert. Her fingers tightened around the book. You wrote this? She asked, her voice trembling despite her effort to stay steady. Jack didn't move. Yes. The answer came too quickly. Too honestly. And that made it worse. Who is she? Tử Tiên asked. Straight. No hesitation. Because she already knew this mattered. Jack's jaw tightened. He didn't answer. And that silence was louder than anything. Jack! Her voice cracked slightly now. Who is she? He took a step forward. Tien, that was a long time ago. That's not what I asked, she said sharply, cutting him off. For the first time, there was tension between them again. Real tension. The kind that doesn't disappear easily. Jack exhaled slowly. His eyes dropped for a brief moment, then returned to her. It doesn't matter anymore. That was the wrong answer. Tử Tiên let out a short, breathless laugh. Doesn't matter, she repeated. You wrote that you would never stop loving her. Her voice trembled, but now it carried pain. You said that, she continued, lifting the notebook slightly, her hands shaking. You wrote it like it was everything. Jack ran a hand through his hair, frustration flashing across his face. I was young. And now, she stepped closer. What changed? He didn't answer immediately, because the truth was complicated and dangerous. The room felt smaller. The distance between them, even smaller. But somehow, they had never felt further apart. Tien, Jack said again, softer now. Why are you doing this? Her eyes widened slightly. Why am I doing this? She repeated, disbelief filling her voice. I found this. I didn't go looking for it. It was hidden. That word hit him. Hidden. Because it was. And there was a reason for that. I didn't want this to hurt you, he said quietly. But it already is, she snapped, tears finally spilling over. Do you even hear yourself? Silence. Heavy. Sharp. Unavoidable. Tu Tian looked down at the notebook again. Then back at him. Her voice dropped. Do you still love her? The question lingered. Fragile. Terrifying. Jack closed his eyes for a second, then opened them. But before he could answer, she flipped to the last page. And froze. Because this time there was a name. Written clearly. Carefully. As if it meant everything. Her breath stopped. Her hands began to shake uncontrollably. Because that name was not a stranger. Not someone distant. Not someone unknown. It was someone she knew. Someone close. Someone impossible. Her voice came out as a whisper. Broken. This name. Jack's expression changed instantly. Tian? No. She stepped back, shaking her head, her eyes wide with disbelief. No, this isn't real. The notebook slipped slightly in her grip. Her entire world tilted. Because the name written on that page was her sister's. And in that moment everything changed. The name didn't disappear no matter how many times Tu Tian blinked. Stayed there. Clear. Unforgiving. Burning into her eyes as if it had always been waiting for this moment. Waiting to shatter something that had once felt unbreakable. Her fingers loosened. The notebook slipped slightly, almost falling from her hands. This is a mistake, she whispered, but even she didn't believe it. Because deep down she already knew. Jack didn't speak. And that silence confirmed everything. You knew her, Tu Tian said slowly, her voice trembling with disbelief. You loved her. Jack took a step forward. Tian, listen to me. No. She stepped back immediately, her whole body shaking now. Don't come closer, not yet. The distance between them widened. Not physically, but emotionally. Like a crack spreading through something fragile. Say it, she demanded, her eyes locked onto his. Say her name. Jack's jaw tightened. Because once he said it, there was no going back. Lan, he said quietly. The sound of that name hit harder than anything else. Tử Tiên Sprit Cầu Gut. Lan. Her older sister. The one who had left home years ago. The one who had always been different. Stronger. Braver. And now the one who had once held Jack's heart. You loved my sister. Tu Tian repeated, her voice barely holding together. Jack didn't deny it. Yes. The truth fell between them. Heavy. Unavoidable. And you never told me? She asked, her voice rising now, pain breaking through every word. I couldn't. You couldn't. She let out a broken laugh. Or you didn't want to? Jack ran a hand through his hair, frustration and guilt colliding in his expression. It wasn't that simple. Then explain it to me, she cried. Because right now, all I see is that I married a man who once loved my sister, and still writes about her like she was everything. Her voice echoed through the room. Sharp. Raw. Real. Jack stepped forward again. This time she didn't move. Because she needed answers more than distance. I met her before I met you, he began, his voice low but steady. Back when I had nothing. No company. No future. Nothing. Tu Tian's eyes flickered slightly. She was the one who believed in me, he continued. She stayed when no one else did. Each word felt like a knife. Not because it was wrong, but because it was true. And then, Tử Tiên Asket Quy Eli. Jack's expression changed. Something darker. Something unfinished. She left. The room fell silent again. She didn't say goodbye, he continued. Didn't explain. She just disappeared. Tử Tiên hết tai tên. Cause that part. She knew. Her sister had left without explanation. Without closure. Without looking back. I searched for her, Jack admitted. For a long time. Tu Tian looked down slightly. And then? She asked. And then I met you. The words were simple. But they carried weight. Tử Tiên sẽ ai slide phết slow. Jack stepped closer. I didn't fall in love with you because you reminded me of her, he said firmly. I fell in love with you because you were completely different. Her breath hitched slightly. You were real, he continued. You argued with me. You challenged me. You made me feel something new.
Tử Tiên Sahen's chamber.
But you still loved her, she whispered. Jack didn't look away. I did. The honesty hurt, but it also mattered. And now, she asked again. This time he didn't hesitate. I love you. The words were clear, steady, present. Tu Tian stood there, caught between past and present, between what had been and what was. Her heart pulled in two directions she didn't know how to reconcile. Because how do you accept that the man you love once loved someone so close to you? Someone who shares your blood, your memories, your childhood? How do you separate those things? How do you not compare? Did you ever think of me as her? She asked softly. Jack shook his head immediately. Never. Not even once. Not even once. He stepped closer again. This time close enough to reach her. But he didn't touch her. Not yet. I hid the notebook because I didn't want the past to hurt you, he said quietly. Not because I was still living in it. Tu Tian's eyes filled with tears again. But it still did, she whispered. I know. That was all he said. No excuses. No defense. Just acceptance. Silence settled between them. Not empty, but heavy. Full of things unsaid. Full of things still unresolved. After a long moment, Tu Tian finally spoke. If she came back. Jack didn't let her finish. She didn't. That's not what I asked. Their eyes locked again. This time stronger. If she came back, she continued, her voice steady despite the tremble underneath. What would you do? The question lingered. Dangerous. Final. Jack held her gaze. Didn't look away. Didn't hesitate. I would still choose you. The answer came without pause. Without doubt. And that changed something. Not everything. But something. Tu Tian closed her eyes slowly. Letting the words sink in. Letting the pain exist. But also, letting the truth be heard. When she opened them again, she didn't step back. But she didn't step forward either. Not yet. I need time, she said quietly. Jack nodded. I know. He didn't reach for her. Didn't push. Because this time he understood. Some wounds don't heal with words. They heal with time. With truth. With choice. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees. Inside, the notebook lay forgotten on the floor. Open. Exposed. No longer hidden. Just like everything else. And somewhere far away, in a place neither of them could see yet, a woman stood quietly, looking at an old photograph in her hand. Her expression unreadable. Her eyes distant. Because the past was not as finished as they thought. And when it returned, it wouldn't come quietly. Back in the small wooden house, Tu Tian stood still for a long moment. Then slowly she turned away. Not leaving. But not staying the same either. And Jack watched her go, knowing that love alone might not be enough this time, but hoping it still could be.